Hello and welcome to the second KRM functions subproject meeting. We have a few items on the agenda today, so let's just dive in. I believe we have all met each other, so we don't need to do any introductions today. So let's just go with the first topic, which is the function improvement PR. Munchie, do you want to hear a little bit of PR here and go for it?
Yeah, so this is like a follow-up discussion. So we have discussed this in a previous meeting. So I want to like trying to understand what should I resolve before like we can merge this. So yeah, that's what I want to. That's why I want to bring this up again here. And Jeremy said he is going to provide some feedback, but I'm still waiting for his feedback.
I see it was 12 days ago. Yeah, have you tried contacting him on Slack? I would recommend reaching out. He's often available there. I haven't heard on this in particular. So did you want to go over the recent comments and discuss them specifically, or did you have like a more general question to ask?
We can go through the recent comment.
Sure.
Yeah, so this one is from Yuan. It's this one is about like because if we change resource list item from Arnold to list of cube object, it's a breaking change for the existing users. So for this one, I think if we choose to change the type of resource list items, we will do that in the next minor release, which is will contains all the breaking changes, since KYAML is still pre-V1. And the existing users, they can choose to upgrade to this minor version, or they can like stay with the current version or the patch version of their existing minor version. We are not like forcing them to upgrade, since we are following Semver here.
Yep. And we can make breaking changes. This would be a pretty huge one. So like, just because we can doesn't mean we shouldn't be careful about it. But I agree with you that strictly speaking, it's perfectly fine to go ahead and make changes that we think are warranted in an alpha library. But with this specific change, it's actually related to the exact same thing that my comment down here is really about. So for the combination of those two reasons, I would say we should stay with our node in as the function config and the items. I don't know if do you want me to explain myself more from what I said here, or did you have a, like you said you were okay with merging it, so it sounded like.
Yeah, so I said that, yeah, so because I want to get this improvement get in, like instead of being blocked here and the user get nothing. So I'm feeling okay to kind of merge it, even though it's not optimal from from my perspective. But we can, in my opinion, we can try to do it iteratively. Like we can first do this, and in the future, we can revisit this if it no longer makes sense.
Okay. Did you understand my rationale that like there's just so much about this package that is oriented around our node transformation, like the filters, the selectors, the matchers, that like a huge amount of the like high level, like user-friendly convenience tools would stop working, and we'd have to invent duplicates of them for the duplicate object type if we were to have a second one.
So for the selectors and the matchers, so why does it like suddenly stop working?
Because they're oriented around our nodes. So like the selector itself expects to be a filter, which is an R node. It's a function that takes an R node in and gives their list of R nodes in and gives a list of R nodes out. And matchers are a subset of that, which instead of taking a collection, they take an instance, they see if it matches or not, and return a Boolean, but they're R node oriented. So we have these like really high level convenience functions that are like framework.matchAll is one of them, that you just give it your filter, which they're pre-made ones that are just like the name of the kind, the name, like just you can give it the string kind, the string name, the string, whatever, you know, very high level. And then it will match all the objects with that. You also have the equivalent with match any that supports the same sort of thing, like super high level operations, but under the hood, they're built around our node, and they expect to be passed on our node to be able to operate on it, because that's how the whole framework is oriented right now. So like tools, those are two examples of tools that if you were an end user who started building with KubeObject instead, you just would lose access to those, and you would have to rebuild your own version, or we would have to build a second version of what a selector and a matcher is that handles KubeObject instead. So I saw that as supporting my original argument, honestly, that KubeObject and R node are actually at the exact same level of abstraction, and their purpose is the same, to help, you know, a user who needs to manipulate and dig into Kubernetes resource that came from some YAML that we know has some metadata at the high level, but has arbitrary fields besides that. Like they're at the same level of abstraction. I agree with you that the name sucks. That's unfortunately pretty annoying to the end user to change. Don't know that we could never do that, but the name is certainly part of the problem. And the surface area is very big, but as we were just discussing at the beginning of this conversation, like we can make breaking changes to the library. So instead of having a second class of objects that has a smaller surface area and isn't compatible with a lot of the tools we built, I would rather evolve our node to be more in the shape that you would like, and to be more user-friendly. Because it's part of this alpha package too, right?
Yeah, okay, I got your point. Go ahead, Yuan.
Yeah, I can understand Katrina's concern. Actually, I think before we talk about if this cube object may introduce duplications or there will be a bunch of fixes we need to do on the R node, I think for cube object and the R node, and Monty also mentioned the name pipe. These are actually different ways to introduce the concept, the structure of a hydration of a KRM function to users. I think we want to clarify how we want to introduce the ideas to users. When users hear about R node, pipe, and calling those functions is more like a graph. Is this the right way we want to introduce users? If that make things very complicated, make YAML hard to use, error prone, maybe KubeObject is a better way to introduce the definitions. And from that perspective, even though there will be a lot of work to fixing the surface areas, that still deserves the effort. Yeah, that's my opinions. I think Monty mentioned the name pipe is not good, and you changed that to as main, if I remember correctly. do you mind introducing the new surface and the definition you want to introduce to users? I understand the main effort is that we try to simplify the surface, simplify the functions user can use before they understand a huge number of new terms.
Yeah, I think part of it, I think I brought this up last time too, it is a documentation issue. And I love that this PR has a ton of examples in it because that's really going to help, no matter what the final shape of it ends up being. Like that's totally something we really desperately need. Because this is a really powerful library and it's not just built for those simple use cases that this PR is targeting. And we need to make sure that we continue to satisfy the other use cases as well. Like the way that it's built in layers makes it so that you can build functions that are composable, which is something we don't have any public examples of, but it's really cool because it's all oriented around the super simple concept of transforming an object. Like you get an object and you give an object out, like because we kept it that simple at the low layers, you can actually build a KRM function that invokes other KRM functions just by importing their filters and basically wrapping them. And you can do that like over and over again, basically. And even when you're integrating your function into customize or kept, you're kind of doing that because they're working under the same principles under the hood, which is really cool and super powerful, especially if you're talking about building abstractions. So that's some of the reason for like multi-version API processor, for example. It's a dispatcher that you could use to build your own like orchestrator alternative if you want, but you can also use it just inside of your own function to make it a sustainable project over time, because you'll want to release new versions of it. So you use it as a dispatcher just between v1 alpha 1 and v1 beta 1. So in that sense, like the tools are sort of recursively useful. And that's something that we need to preserve, which is why I'm advocating here for making this like a veneer on top of the existing tools, rather than making sort of a set of tools that are separate or that don't interrupt with the tools that we have that were built for this power. So pipe, I agree, like that's unintuitive to use, let's say. And that one, that's not the entry point though. So I think that was a separate point that we can return to, but like all of the functions that Munchie is adding in this PR to make it easier to, I don't know, for lack of a better expression, like dig through the objects. Like, I think that's all really great and helpful and way more approachable to use than pipe is. But for sequencing filters themselves, the framework has, like, pipe isn't from the framework, right? I think it's KIO maybe, or KML. I don't think it's from the framework. And the framework has its own way of composing filters together and getting them invoked with, like, execute is the main entry point.
So,
and then the API version processor is the, if you want dispatch. Yeah.
If I understand correct, is the main concern about the naming of R-node or cube object? If it's called R-node, then basically the functions merged, except we changed the, I think we changed the metadata's name from get to metadata directly. That's the only concerns about the name, whether we should introduce a new name cube object or we preserve using R-node and adding those cube object functions to the R-node, replacing the ones we think can be confusing.
I think we're on the same page that at least for this PR, the new features will get added to R-node instead, and that will put R-node back in this struct here, the resource list struct we're looking at. And we were kind of diving into the reasons behind it to make sure that we're on the same page about that.
I thought we want to
Munchie,
simplify
so in the in the short term, I think we can merge the kube object and the R node. So it at least can give user improvement of this. But in the long term, we still have this problem, which is R node. It's not a intuitive name, and um, like it still have a very big surface. So what's
Do
the
you see a
plan
barrier
for the
to
long
just
term? What's the long term plan for the R node?
I think renaming it is not to be done lightly, just because of what a serious pain it would be for everybody to accommodate on the break and change front. We could consider it if you think it's vitally important and worth the disruption. In terms of the surface area, I think we can totally change that, especially if we're introducing with the changes in your PR better ways, easier ways to do the exact same thing. Sure, why not get rid of the old ways? And I think by using customize, like customize is a heavy consumer of this, right? And it will show us any downsides that we might not have realized of the consequences of reducing the surface area, like any edge cases that maybe we didn't consider with the new way that we're proposing of doing things. But like this, our node is part of this library, right? And we can evolve it as well if there are things about it that are not working properly, that are confusing, that we have better alternatives for, then let's propose them. It's part of KML too.
Okay. Another problem I think we may want to address is that so currently when user want to develop functions, so they need to understand the framework package and the YAML package, and also the KIO package, which combined is like pretty big, pretty steep learning curve. You know, so in my opinion, that for the framework package, it's currently depend on KIO package and expose some of the KIO stuff. So I think ideally, like we should not do that to simplify this. For example, like the KIO filter is heavily used in the framework package, and meanwhile we have the resource list processor interface. So they are, in my opinion, doing the very similar stuff, and this often confuse the users because they don't know what want to use which.
In my opinion, that comes back to what I was saying before about it being a documentation problem, because this is a really powerful library that's built to be used in layers. We need to provide guidance about what the simple case looks like. And if we had like, here's the tutorial of how to build a simple thing. Here's the tutorial of how to build a multi-version API. Here's the tutorial of how to layer them together. Like a filter is the central concept that all of these things are revolving around. The concept that you have some YAML that you're taking in, you're going to do whatever to it, and then you emit it. But sometimes that's not sufficient, because you need, per the spec, to have some sort of configuration that changes what that filter does. So the filter interface on its own, just by satisfying that, doesn't mean that you have any means of having a function config. So that's why we have more layers around that. Like you can, if I remember correctly, build a processor straight out of a filter for the case where you don't actually have any config. and the processor interface lets you avoid filtering altogether if you don't feel like it. If I remember that correctly, that it's like process and you take in a resource list and you mutate that resource list and you emit an error. I think that's the signature, which would let you do whatever you want in there technically if you don't feel like implementing it with the tools that we've provided. So it's like it's built in a layered way where you can hook in where you want. So I am okay with like if there are opportunities to not expose KIO tools where we can just take care of stuff for the user, that's great. Filter though is like the low level thing that we build on tops of all the other tools that we provide. So that one in particular can't go away for sure. That's why our node is so central, because everything's built on filter. I'm just looking at your comment here, which I think is related to what you were just saying. And in terms
yes.
of,
yeah,
so
and also the KL provides some reader writer stuff, which I believe we don't need to expose to the user necessarily, because this reader writer provides something like either set reader annotations, which is like more for the orchestrators, but not for the function authors. For the function authors, they are more likely to just read the YAML and decode it, not to really set these additional internal annotations. So I think we can actually hide the KL reader stuff, just do it underlying in the framework, so that can reduce the surface that the user need to learn. So with that, user only need to learn the framework package, and then the YAML package should be enough.
Yeah, I guess I'm not attached to exposing the KO reader and writer specifically. You make a good point that like most of the options that it has aren't useful to the function authors. I think it's mostly being used for expediency, because to make your function testable, you don't want it to assume that it's reading straight from standard in and standard out. You want to use a reader interface of some sort, so that so you can write test cases that you are controlling the input and the output. So for that reason, all of the places that we're assuming that things are coming from standard in or standard out are in a sub package KML function framework command, and everything in the framework itself uses a reader. If there's a way to make it less complicated, like by hiding the fact that it's a KIO reader that has all these fancy options, like I think we need some sort of reader to make it continue to possible to make these testable, but we don't have to expose options if that's something we're doing and it's not necessary.
I think we can provide some test utilities or some test harness to kind of use the KIO package to like read the write package. But if we let the user directly use KIO, it's hard. It's like not easy to use.
Have you seen the test utilities that we have already? There's a whole test utilities sub package as well in the framework, and it works at the processor level.
I think I looked at that sometimes before, but I probably need to look at that again to refresh my.
the gist of what the package does is it actually lets you test either if you're using the command package to build a Cobra command, you can use it for that. Or if you're not using Cobra, you can test a processor directly. And the setup is that you have one directory per test case, and you have conventional file names that have the input and the expected output, whether that's an error or a resource list successfully produced. And the framework automatically kind of wires all that up, counts the test cases for you and executes them. So like when you write test cases with that framework, you have like a directory of directories for your test cases, and then your actual Go code to drive that is like 3 lines of code, and it can automatically update your fixtures for you and stuff too. It's pretty cool.
Is it assuming it's a golden test?
It's assuming what? Sorry.
The unit test is a golden test. Kind of you have the input in you have the input in a directory, and then you have the expected output in a separate directory, and
Yeah,
which also known as
almost.
golden test, golden files, and then you compare them.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They're all in the same directory and they have conventional names, but that's exactly it. It's golden file tests, and it supports errors too. So it's just a different file name if you expect an error, and then it matches the text in the errors file against the actual error that was received.
Okay, let's see.
So it's always at the integration level, really, because you're taking in a resource list and putting the result.
And do we use this framework test U2 package in the anywhere in KYAML?
Yes, I think we do. I don't remember where offhand, but I'm pretty sure we use it at least one place. I've certainly used it on internal projects as well. Makes it really fast to set up your samples.
Okay. Okay. I will take a closer look at this.
Mengqi, besides, do you plan to fix the KL filter issue you mentioned in the comment? Or are you suggesting
Not
refactoring?
in this PR. Not in this PR. It's like we can fix that in a follow-up later PR.
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering if we should have an agreement on the high-level ideas, like what kind of things what we want to achieve. From this PR, I can see we are trying to make the KYAML functions more powerful. At the same time, we want to simplify or truncate the surface areas. We want to redefine the terms so it's easier for users to understand. From that perspective, my understanding is that we think KubeObject is a better name than Arnold, and we want to deprecate existing Arnold functions, and at the same time remove some of the functions that may cause confusions or have potential overlapping with the other functions.
I think we decided that on this PR, we're just going to add some new functions to our node for folks to play around with. And in a future follow-up, we can reduce the API surface of our node by converting some of Customize, for example, to use the new version instead of the old version. And if that goes well, you know, as proof of concept, then just get rid of the old way that is just more confusing and doesn't work any better. And then as a separate decision, we can consider renaming KubeObject, but that one, I think we need to have a further conversation and do that in its own specific PR because of the amount of impact, just because of how central that object is.
I thought the Q object, the confusion of our node is a significant issue. And if we do plan to rename it, why not do it earlier so as less user will be affected once they do love this increasing powerful R node or Q object functions.
I just don't think we should mix that in with other changes. I think we should consider it on its own. And there are already, like, the reality is like that has been at the heart of this from the beginning. So there are already tons of people, tons of repos out there that have that. So would need to make a considerable amount of adjustments, and we shouldn't take that decision lightly. Like, I think we should just, you could make, as soon as these PRs are in, you could make that PR in a week or two from now, but it should be in its own PR where we deliberately make that decision. And like when an end user comes and like is having to have that update burden, they can specifically see the PR that did it and the explanation for why it happened. And
the problems will be once we have the this PR merged, the functions added, we'll have more customers start using those functions, import the KYAML, and the renaming will be much harder for them at that time. So why not do it now? I think that's also what Monty mentioned, that we want to rename it, and has the new name be available as soon as possible before people have to change.
I mean, if we don't do releases that regularly, what I said could happen before the next release even. I just don't think it should all be in one PR. Yeah, and we should see what the consequences are for ourselves. Like when we do that, we'll have to rename, like do the rename ourselves all throughout customized. So we'll be able to see the kind of levels of pain that we're inflicting on our users and make the decision as part of that.
I see. Thanks.
I totally agree that it's a better name. I'm just hesitant because of the impact.
Okay, yeah.
Munshi, is there anything else about this PR that you wanted to discuss?
I think so. To summarize it, so the action item here is to merge the cube object surface with the R node, and then also for the S main functions that can be merged with the command subpackage, right. And then this PR should be good to go. Is there anything else should be addressed?
I don't want to say that I will for sure approve it just like that, because it's so big. But those are the main blockers that I see right now, and I will commit to, as soon as that is updated, taking another look at the PR, and with it getting smaller as well, I think that will help with the reviewability. I just want to make sure that what we're changing is going to have an internally consistent result, and that our tools are going to continue to work together and work for both that in supporting the simpler use case. We're not going to break the advanced use cases. So I can't just say offhand that like those are the only changes that are required before we merge. Like I'm going to need to test it again once the changes have been made to make sure that all that I just said is true.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, makes sense. Sounds good.
It would be nice to have Jeremy's feedback too, because I know they internally have a bunch of usage of this that would be super useful to use as an experience data point. So hopefully we'll be able to hear from Jeremy as well. All right, back to the agenda here.
Oh, I actually
Okay.
removed my items. One is about the KML runtime we just talked about earlier. That we're going to drop the Starlark, and I'm going to add that to our own repos. And that also means we are going to drop the other runtime, right? I don't remember the name.
Yeah, so there was an informal discussion with Kustomize about this. The decision is that on the Kustomize side, we don't intend to keep supporting Starlark as a runtime. So if the KML library evolves the Starlark implementation, then it's not particularly relevant to Kustomize because Kustomize is deprecating that feature completely and we could remove it whenever as far as we're concerned. The question of moving it out to its own repo, like this is CNCF owned code, so that would have to be brought up at a SIG meeting. The runtimes are their own feature. There's a point actually on this PR in the PR description about how big the surface area of KML is itself. Like KML has tons of different things in it. It's not just the function library that we're improving in this PR, but the runtime that you're talking about here is another sort of independent feature. And it could totally make sense to have that in its own repo. And I don't have any conceptual objections about that myself, but would have to figure out with the SIG how to, like, whether that logistically makes sense and is worth like the effort of extracting it versus just evolving the Starlark thing to meet your needs and unhooking Kustomize from using it because Kustomize doesn't care anymore.
So you means the whole FN directory can be in its own repo at the same time. Correct me. At the same time, we remove the Starlark subdirectory under the FN.
Not the whole FN. FN runtime is what I was talking
FN
about.
runtime. Yes.
Yeah, because
we
that's
remove Starlark, put runtime in its separate repo.
Either just Starlark or this entire function runtime could be published separately. But the path of least resistance is to leave it here and just do whatever you want to do with Starlark. And then if we look in, where is this plugin loader? Somewhere in here. Probably not because it's not importing that file, but somewhere in this vicinity, there's something that makes Kustomize specifically use function runtime Starlark, and we could just disconnect that, and then the changes that you make will not have an impact on Kustomize anymore because Kustomize won't support Starlark, and that would be the easiest thing to do for sure.
Makes sense.
Before we go any further, though, oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Do you have another point about that?
So I want so regarding the runtime, I want to ask that. So in Kustomize, have you heard any complaints or concerns about using Dockers with Kustomize? I want to hear.
Docker. So we definitely are aware of plenty of use cases where Kustomize itself is being used in Docker, and Docker isn't possible. So they aren't able to use the containerized version of functions as a result. The alternative there is exec. So that's why, as far as Kustomize is concerned, exec support is the number 2 priority after containers, and that's the way forward that we decided in our KEP, is to support both containers and exec as the extensions points or mechanisms.
So I mean, like from a license perspective, like, Docker changed some of their license like for Mac and the Windows. So have you heard any users like feedback on this?
No, actually, I haven't. Have you?
Yeah. So for KEP side, we want to find or provide some Docker alternatives for running containers, since Docker will no longer be free on Mac and Windows. So this is a concern for CAP. So that's why I'm asking if this is a problem for customized.
I haven't heard the feedback, but that totally makes sense to me. So to be clear, I'm not advocating for the function runtime libraries used by kept and customized to diverge. Like, I think they should stay together, and orchestrators can pick and choose which ones that they want to support. So like if kept wants to build a non-Docker container runtime, I totally want it in function runtime, or whether that's inside KYAML or as its own repo. I think having like a central collection of runtimes that are supported by that like help implement the spec, I think that totally still makes sense.
Also, just to add, I do have some user feedback from customized users saying that they can't run KRM, containerized KRM functions because they have end user devices that don't have Docker or aren't supported by Docker. So I think a Docker alternative makes a lot of sense for those users.
Yeah, with very little context, hi folks, my name's Nick. I am for many years was the tech lead of Crossplane, now part of the sort of Crossplane project steering committee. We have a use case where we're highly interested in using KRM functions. It's still early, but absolutely shelling out to Docker as the way that we run things is not going to work. So I'm only just diving into these runtime libraries and whatnot at the moment, but definitely curious to chat to you all about it. Unfortunately, I can only attend these meetings for like 2 seconds between other meetings, so I have to drop right now, but I'll definitely try and be here in future, and really interested to hear what you're all working on.
Great, Nick, thank you, welcome.
Welcome.
See you later.
Okay, so on the topic of that alternate runtime, is that something that you're working on, or is there like a doc that we should all go check out about what the alternatives might be, or is there an action item here basically?
So I'm working on exploring this, but we are still early in the early stage. So I think if we have some solutions, I think it can be used in both CAP and customized.
Sounds great.
Cool.
All right. Should we move on to stand-ups, or actually, Yuan, did you say you had 2 topics?
Yeah, the other one is about so for KYAML is under customized, but we release it separately. I'm wondering every time we want to make service changes, though it's in alpha, I mean in long term, once it's in V1 or a more mature version, how we can guarantee the do we have like some end prod infrastructure that we can make sure it wouldn't affect our users? I'm thinking like just as Mengqi mentioned, the golden test. Is that possible? We encourage our KYAML or customized users to add their own test in the repo. They don't need to tell us their use case. Say for private, they may have a private repo that they won't be able that we won't be able to realize in the Go library import. So for KYAML, we have in the Go document, it tells all the public repo which imports that KYAML library. But there's it wouldn't show the private repo. And to better serve the private repo users, we can encourage people to add tests in the KYAML or customized framework repo, and we make sure those tests passes every time we make service change, or notify them, or notify the corresponding users who has the test fails. Test can be the golden test. User only provides the input and the expected output. This is more like end prod for customized repo.
For customize itself, we totally have something like that.
Customized repo. Sorry, I mean basically I mean the KYAML.
Right.
I'm not, did I make myself clear?
I think I understand the general idea, but I'm having trouble sort of imagining what the specifics look like, because we're like a toolkit for building a bunch of different things. So, and
It
like
would be
we're
like, it can be like I'm a KYAML user, but I don't. My repo is public, is private, and I import the customized repo, KYAML repo, KYAML libraries. I want to make sure the changes on KYAML wouldn't break my repo, my own code that I cannot share publicly. So I add I add test in KYAML code base that I expect every change to KYAML will run a pre-submit test against my resource input and the expected output I provide. And if the test fails, that PR shouldn't be merged. Or if KYAML maintainers have some breaking change about like the UX change, I can be notified without sharing details, without checking the latest change on KYAML.
I think that at a high level, that's definitely a great idea to have some sort of like easy workflow for people to contribute their test cases. Like I said, Customize does have something very similar to that in concept, where even for just like bug reports, we encourage people to commit test cases to this particular directory. So having like a workflow for that established, totally. I don't think we want to be responsible, especially given the scope of the team, to like reach out to individual people. But what that would do for us is make us for sure realize when it's a breaking change, and then we'll have like, we'll bump it to 2.0, and that will be the notification basically.
Yeah. So once we make that more like automated and prod framework, then it basically reduces the maintenance cost. At the same time, I think we always have the question: have we heard people reporting certain things? It may make the decisions easier once we already have those resources provided by users.
Have we heard what reports?
Oh, I mean, when we talk to make a decision, there's always a question like, have we heard people reporting certain kind of usage of this feature? And we try to use that to help us make decisions. Rather than asking those questions, if users, they provide those Kubernetes resource in the golden test as the in and the out YAML files, then it's easier for us to check and make sure how users will feel about those feature changes or the UX change.
I think it will only ever be a starting point to get the answer to that question, just because like the portion of users who will bother to actually contribute is going to be a small slice of what's out there. But that said, that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. Like, it's definitely better to have more internal data and more enforcement of what constitutes a breaking change than not. That's definitely a good thing. We just want to be careful about when we declare 1.0, because once we do, we won't be able to make big changes like the ones that we are making now. And we made a big overhaul last year too, so we'll have to be careful about when we declare that moment.
Yeah,
Anything
that's
else? Me. Okay, thanks.
No.
All right, so shall we do some stand-ups quickly here? Munchie on the registry.
Sure. So on the registry side, so Natasha is working on render Helm chart function v2 kind of. So I have created PRs to enable the testing for the repo. So it's waiting for review from the SIG testing owner. So
Oh, great.
yeah, after that merge, the testing should be enabled. Yeah.
Awesome. I just wanted to mention on the composition side, I probably won't do a regular stand up for it because the core code is out there and there's a list of issues that need to be tackled before it could be merged, just because it won't be helpful without the issues tackled first. It's not a burning priority for the customized project compared to other issues that we're facing right now. So on the roadmap, it is there, but it's there as a secondary priority. So unless other folks feel passionately about moving that forward, it's not something that I'll be personally working on for a little bit. Still on the roadmap, but it's not something I'm gonna start with this year. Anything else to add before we wrap it up here? Natasha, did you have any sort of stand up?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming to this KRM Functions Subproject meeting. Thank you for all of your hard work on these topics, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.